Want to test my, yep, we're on. Well, good morning. Good to see each of you and hear your voices. Let's see. Malachi's coming around with some handouts. So if he doesn't get to you, wave him down. Still waiting for some. I can see my slides up here, but I can't see them on my iPad, which I usually use to anticipate what I'm going to show you next, so we'll see if those come up eventually. Kind of a short section we're going to be looking at this morning. It's the last part of Joshua chapter 8. Last week, we looked at the conquest of the city of Ai, and that brought us up through verse 29 in Joshua chapter 8. And today we're just going to cover 6 verses, verses 30 to 35. It's its own unique little section that's not related content-wise to what comes before or after. Let's see. So we ended up with verse 29, that the Israelites killed the king of Ai, hung him on a tree after he was dead and gone. It was the end of the day. They threw him at the entrance of the city gate and raised a great heap of stones over his body that the narrator says stands to this day. Then we have a connecting word, which is then, to start out verse 30. And we find ourselves in a completely different place. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord. And of course, you have that in all caps or small caps. That's standing in for the word Yahweh, which is God's personal name. So they built an altar to Yahweh, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal. And unless you really enjoy Bible geography, at this point you're asking yourself, where's Mount Ebal, right? Yeah, good. That's the right question to ask. You can see it on your handout on the map I gave you. This is a little different map, but shows Much the same thing in different colors and stuff. So on the map I've got on the slide here, Jericho and Gilgal, where their camp is down at the bottom. Ai is off to the left, up in the hill country. Mount Ebal is up in the north. It sits across a valley from Mount Gerizim, so they're kind of a pair, Ebal and Gerizim, Ebal to the north and Gerizim on the south. And the ancient city of Shechem is located in that little valley, or at the mouth of that little valley. And that's Shechem appears over and over and over again in the Old Testament. By the way, if you like New Testament connections, Shechem is very close to Sychar, where Jesus met the woman at the well of Jacob. So there's some New Testament connection here as well. Ai is straight west of Jericho. Would you like me to? So here's Jericho. Ai is right here. Bethel is here. There's two possible routes that they could have taken. They could have gone up to the ridge and then north on the ridge route, or they could have gone up the Jordan Valley and then up this road here to get there. They're both about the same length. My guess is that they took the valley route because there's more cities and villages up here that they would have had to go past, or this is a less inhabited route. So that would be my guess, but the text just doesn't say. We suddenly find them at Mount Ebal. So, boy, this feels a little bit like Russian roulette or something, because I'm going to advance to the next slide. And I've got just blue blocks here, so I can't really tell what the next one is. But I do know I've got some slides here of this area. Just don't know how far they go. That's not a picture of that area. Okay, I'll roll with it. I know, right? So I will show you some slides of this area, but first, the question you were all mulling around in the back of your mind, why are they going up here? Well, the first thing is that Moses had told them specifically to go here. He does that in Deuteronomy 11, and then he'll do that again in Deuteronomy 27. And I wanted to read through those with you quickly. So this is Moses speaking. And he says, "See, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I'm commanding you today, and the curse, if you do not listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I'm commanding you today, by following other gods which you have not known. And it shall come about, when the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, that you shall place the blessings on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. Are they not across the Jordan, west of the way, toward the sunset, in the land of the Canaanites who live in the Arabah, opposite Gilgal, beside the oaks of Moreh?" Well, I'm not sure that every one of us could answer that question, except presumably yes, right? Probably so. The Arabah is the Jordan Rift Valley. Gilgal is where they're staying. The oaks of Moreh, that forest died long ago, but it is mentioned even back in the time of Abraham, when he came by this same mountain, and, well, Shechem. No, Moses never made it up here. But he's telling them, when you get there into the Holy Land, do blessings and curses on Ebal and Gerizim. And he'll give us a little more detail in chapter 27, which I'm going to next. Assuming that I've laid this out correctly. Okay. Then Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, "Keep all the commandments which I command you today. So it shall be on the day when you shall cross the Jordan to the land which the Lord your God gives you, that you shall set up for yourself large stones and coat them with lime, and write on them all the words of this law when you cross over, in order that you may enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. So it shall be, when you cross the Jordan, you shall set up on Mount Ebal these stones, as I'm commanding you today, and you shall coat them with lime. Moreover, you shall build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. You shall not wield an iron tool on them. You shall build the altar of the Lord your God of uncut stones, and you shall offer on it burnt offerings to the Lord your God, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings, and eat there, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. And you shall write on the stones all the words of this law very distinctly. Now the sections there that I've highlighted or colored are specific things that we see in this passage that Joshua did. So Moses gave pretty specific direction to them on what to do. That's why they're going up here. It's not as random as it might appear just going through the book of Joshua. They had actually been told to go up here. Let's see, I do think I have a couple more verses here. In Genesis 12 and verse 6, Abraham passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, which sits right between these two, I'll call them mountains, very tall hills. To the oak of Moreh, we read about that in Deuteronomy. Now the Canaanite was then in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So Abraham built an altar outside Shechem. Where? He doesn't say specifically, but there's that's pretty close, and it may even be that it was at this same site on Mount Ebal. It wouldn't be surprising in any way. That's followed up. Yes. Next verse. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. That's extra. But isn't that fascinating? Because in our conquest of Ai, we just read about an ambush force that was hiding in the valley between Bethel and Ai. And here we read Abraham had set up an altar on the hill, presumably right to the west. There's a couple of them there. And worshiped God there. I'm not going to do anything more with it. It's just, interesting. Abraham marching down through the land, and then these guys almost in a reverse path. How many years in between? Abraham, roughly 2100 BC, and Joshua, roughly 1400. So, about 700 years. I'll leave it to you whether there's a connection there, but interesting. Jacob also built an altar in this area. This is in Genesis 33. This is on Jacob's way from working for his uncle, and he's coming south and going to meet his dread brother, Esau. But on the way, he came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, and he came from Padan Aram and camped before the city, and he bought a piece of land where he pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So Jacob had actually purchased some land there, so this would be within 50 years of Abraham, roughly. Bought land there and also erected an altar. All of that just to say there's quite a bit of history in this area. So it's not purely a random area. Now you'll notice Ebal is not named in either of these Abraham or Jacob stories, but it's right there. The first reference we have to Ebal is when Moses tells the Israelites, You need to go do this stuff at Ebal. The last reference we have to Ebal is when Joshua and the Israelites do this stuff there. Did you pick up that the curses were on Ebal and the blessings on Gerizim? And I wonder if there's not a connection there. The text doesn't make that explicit, but we are standing a few miles to the east, looking west. Shechem is in the valley, at the mouth of this valley, and you can see Gerizim there to the south and Mount Ebal to the north. By the way, the modern-day city of Nablus, you heard of the Palestinian West Bank city of Nablus? Hasn't been in the news much lately, which is good. That is, if you just keep going down that valley, it opens up into the modern city of Nablus, and it spills out this direction as well. Another aerial view. So the ancient mound is the one where the arrow is pointing there to Shechem, and then Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal on either side, north and south. This is Mount Ebal, again looking toward the west. Do you call that a mountain? Just a big hill. They're two of the highest points in this area, but nothing like Mount Hermon or something like that. This is from the northeast, and the altar that archaeologists have uncovered is kind of down on the slope. It's not right out at the edge of the valley. It's about a mile distant from the tip-top point, which, interestingly enough, the text says that they built this altar in Mount Ebal rather than on, which might be an indication that it's not right up at the tip-top, but it's off on the slope a little ways. I also think, practically speaking, they needed room for people. Part of the sacrifice was to sit around and eat and celebrate, and there would be a little more room further down the slope. Okay, so I think even though I can't see anything other than blue blocks, I think I'm into a little section now where I'll show you some closer and closer pictures of this altar that they have discovered there. This is from a little distance. There's a lot of stone in this area, and I realize some of this is difficult to see from a distance. Right here is the altar, and there's a stone kind of fence around it, and when they dug, they also found remnants of some buildings. It's a complex site that has some history to it, multiple rebuildings and revisions, and it's difficult to date. The guy that excavated this, Adam Zertal, he discovered some late bronze pottery in it, and he took that as giving him a date of about 1250 BC. That's about 150 years later than what we would expect if the Exodus happened in 1445, and here we are around 1400. But I'm quite comfortable myself dating this to the time of Joshua for a couple of reasons. There are lower levels than what Zertal excavated, and also this stuff continued to be used. Obviously, it was rebuilt a couple of times, continued to be reused in later periods, so I would expect a little bit later pottery. But late bronze pottery, I mean, that's in the late bronze runs from about 1500 to about 1200. So that covers the time of Joshua around 1400. So any way you cut it, it's really close. Zertal assigns it to Joshua, but he also thinks the Exodus was later, like around 1250. So I actually think that may have influenced his dating of this. John? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it varies a lot by the time of year that photos are taken. They are quite dry typically in the summer and quite green in the wintertime. It can be very fertile. It depends a lot on the rain. And God told the Israelites, you follow me and obey me, and I will send you consistent rain, and your land will be lush. You disobey me, and I'll pull that back. And it doesn't take much movement in the airstream to make the difference between a drought summer and a wet summer, the way that area is set up. It reminds me of Elijah. Next 3 years, it's not going to rain. And sure enough, they had a terrible drought, and we know of more of those. Other thing is that this used to be much more heavily forested. We'll run across that a little bit later in Joshua. Just a passing reference a couple of times to go up into the hill country, cut down trees, and make yourself a place up there. But it used to be a lot more heavily treed. The Israelis are, in some areas, re-treeing the hill country. You can actually see that on a satellite photo of the area, the border between them and the Palestinian areas. But a lot of it is still like this, quite barren. I think it was in the Ottoman period, they started to tax people per tree on their land. So you know what people are going to do. So now it's just bare, a lot of it. Yeah. She's seating. Sure. Yeah. At least in some areas. Yeah, it would just be fun to go back, do a flyover like once a century for the past 3,000 years, and see how this area changed. It's definitely capable. It reminds me, some of this kind of area reminds me a lot of the Ozarks, where it is pretty rocky soil in many places, but you can just have magnificent forests too. Okay. There you can, this is a little bit closer, and you can see the altar standing up here. Archaeologists have built it a little bit higher based on the foundation, so it hasn't been this high throughout all of history. Otherwise, everybody would have known where it was from day one. This is the photo you have on your handout. Just gives you a kind of a size perspective. A couple of people standing up on top of there. And I would note a couple of things here. So this is a big square base. Here we have a sloping ramp that goes up to it. And then more in the foreground, we have some walls that go around, an enclosure that goes around the outside here. Every bit of it is made of uncut stone. None of it has been worked. It's just field stone, which fits with the description we have in Joshua. Another photo. I can see this because I'm close enough. There's a line right here, which the archaeologists put in with cement and painted it black so that when you visit you can tell what's been reconstructed and what's original. So they have built it up a little bit higher than it once was. So it's a good-sized thing. Why do we think it's an altar and not like a building or a shed or something like that? Because both inside it and on the outside, they found significant remains of ash and animal bone. And they studied the animal bone, and all of the animal bones that they could identify were from kosher animals. So, again, everything fits with this being an Israelite or Hebrew religious site and an altar specifically. Was the layout like the tabernacle? I don't think I would say that it was like the tabernacle. I didn't bother to pull measurements from the big altar in front of the tabernacle to compare with this. Partly because the question never crossed my mind. The text never says that the tabernacle was up here or that this was supposed to be like that. So I think it would be just coincidence if they happen to be the same size. I mean, there's nothing in the text that tells us it was supposed to be a certain size or anything like that. So this seems like a very large altar to me. And yet when you think about it, the entire nation of Israel is supposed to bring sacrifice here and offer. That's a lot of fire and a lot of meat. So it seems appropriate from that perspective. Some of the inside of that altar. A little more of an aerial view so you can see the main shape, and then there's a ramp that comes up from the north side, I think this is, and then a bit of an enclosure, and then you can see some of the larger wall that surrounded this, apparently never very tall given the stone that's left. Oh, that was Adam Zertal, the guy that excavated. I see that hand. Yeah, so my expectation is that the priests would come up this ramp, which was a biblical mandate. I don't know how familiar you are with that, and I wasn't intending to spend time on it, but they were to have a ramp going up to the altar because they wore robes, and they didn't want them exposing themselves going up steps. You know, you lift a leg real high and your skirt opens up, and don't want that happening. So they were specifically told, I couldn't tell you where off the top of my head, they were to have a ramp that went up to the large sacrificial altar, which appears to be what we have here too. Did I answer your question? Yeah, some other rock in here. Yeah, I think this whole area was prepped to be a burning surface and build a large bonfire there, and then some of these things, I guess I haven't gotten to that yet in the text. We have both in 31 burnt offerings and peace offerings. And those are two different things. Well, I'll come to that. But no sign of any kind of roofed structure. Okay, I should have a few more photos here and even a couple of drawings. There's a drawing from the archaeologist's site plan. These places tended to be kind of long-lived. When Abraham goes by himself and builds an altar, you don't expect anything to follow after that. But when you have a whole nation offering sacrifice at a specific place, is not unexpected that some kind of activity would continue there in succeeding generations. And that seems to have been the case here. They even found a little structure of some sort off to the side of this that may have been used even generations later for a caretaker at this important site. Nothing I've been aware of or ever seen. They would have come up here temporarily. They're living in tents. I really wouldn't expect to be able to find anything. No, and I would expect they're just runs across the ground. I mean, it's not like they're in a city or something where somebody's going to have to clean this up, or, you know, it's intended as a temporary place, at least by Joshua. Yeah, it's a great question, though. This is a plan looking down from the top, drawn by the guys that excavated here. The middle section, and you have this on your handout too, is the most recent. The blue underneath it is older, and then the green at the very bottom, there are these circular altar type things, notoriously difficult to date. So you can see Adam Zertal's date there, which I think is close enough to satisfy me thinking that this is actually a good candidate for the altar that Joshua built. And there's a little more of a 3D reconstruction by Lane Rittmeyer. Okay, lest I run out of time, the scarab of Thutmose III, who I think is most likely the Pharaoh of the Exodus that was discovered here. This is his scarab, and then his cartouche is right here. There's an archer here with a bow and a salamander. See, you didn't see that stuff till somebody told you, right? A scarab, they're called a scarab because they're shaped like a dung beetle. This is the bottom, the flat bottom side. They could be used as a signet. They were also often worn just as an amulet to give good luck. But they often have the name of an Egyptian king on them. Some of them don't. Some of them have, the one on the right here just has a rosette design on it. And they, because of similarity to others that they have dated, they think that's about 1250 BC. I see that hand. A form of money? No, sorry. No, sorry. I mean, somebody might have sold one at some point, but they make their way into all over the Mediterranean basin by trade. So it's not uncommon to find them up in the Levant, up further north in Syria, Lebanon, even Mesopotamia, on the island of Cyprus. They find them all over the place because they were taken there through trade. And they could also last for quite a while. So this doesn't prove that the altar was built in 1425. It's just interesting, because you wouldn't expect these to circulate like for centuries and centuries. Anyhow, another altar of uncut stone at Arad. Comparison, an altar of cut stone. Okay, I need to move on or we will never. Verse 31, he built this altar just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the sons of Israel. We read about that in Deuteronomy. As it's written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no man had wielded an iron tool, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. A burnt offering is one that gets completely consumed. If you're curious, you can read about those in Leviticus 1, 1 through 4. A burnt offering is not a sin offering. They were given because of devotion to God. A sin offering is a different kind. Peace offerings were an offering that was not all burnt up. The fat and the kidneys, of all the crazy things, were burnt. And then the meat was divided between the priest who was offering it and the family that brought it. I kind of like to think of it as a barbecue. You cook it, and then you eat it. And God told him, on the peace offering in particular, I think he said you can eat that the day of, and you can eat it the next day, but anything that's left over on the third day, you have to burn. They didn't eat a lot of meat in this time period, so this is a festive event. They're getting together and making whole burnt offerings, but also shareable, can I call it shareable barbecues? You okay with that? That's not too unreligious? Because they would enjoy eating the ribs and the haunch and the whole thing together. And the priest also got some of it. The priest specifically got the breast and the right thigh, according to Leviticus 7. And then the family that brought it got the rest. And they also, as part of that, would wave bread. So it's and then you eat the bread. But it's almost like this is offered too, this is done in devotion, and then we eat. So, barbecue sandwich? I'm liking this. The first potluck, that's right. Bring what you can. Okay. Verse 32. He wrote there on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written in the presence of the sons of Israel. And that's all we get. But we already know from Deuteronomy that these stones were to be covered with lime and then written on. Lime is burnt limestone that turns to powder, and then when you mix it with water and smear it on something, it gets like concrete, right? So it makes a perfect writing surface. There's got to be a better illustration than Russian roulette, because that's kind of macabre. But let's see what we got here. Some iron tools, more iron tools. This is what they were not supposed to use. These are from roughly the time of Joshua. An Egyptian guy offering a whole bunch of stuff. I can't identify all these items. I can identify some of the animals that are stacked up directly in front of him. And then I'm sure that there's bread and fruit and other things further on, but we'll move right past that. Some Samaritans, the Samaritans even today still do animal sacrifice. They're the only people in the land of Israel that do. This is from the early 1900s, but they still do it today. Here they are. Animal bound and ready for sacrifice. Okay. This is part of a plastered wall at Tel Dir Allah, 9th century, so roughly the time of Elijah. And it has an ink inscription on it. Can you see that? And that is actually a prophecy of Balaam, the son of Beor, who we read about in Exodus. A pretty close parallel, I think, to what we should envision Joshua doing here. Set up stones, plaster them, and then you can write the law on there. I just can't imagine that he wrote the whole 5 books of Moses on there. That would take a couple miles of lime plaster. So what did he write? Could have been the blessings and cursings. It could have been something like an abbreviated, like the 10 Commandments. Those are probably the 2 best guesses that I could give you. The text isn't terribly specific. Okay. Verse 33. And all Israel, with their elders and officers and their judges, were standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, the stranger as well as the native. Half of them stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given command at first to bless the people of Israel. The text here does not specify who stood where, but Moses did. And I think I've got, okay, Google Earth view, Shechem, the ancient city of Shechem, the top of Mount Ebal, the top of Mount Gerizim, the altar that we've been looking at. Do you see these two bowl-shaped areas here? From the middle of one to the middle of the other is about a mile. And there have been a few different folks who have gone here, stand somebody down at the bottom, and folks halfway up can hear their voice if they're a good, strong speaker, because it's a natural amphitheater. And so this is probably where this event took place. Deuteronomy 27 again. Moses charged the people, saying on that day, when you cross over the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And for the curse, these shall stand on Mount Ebal: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And although Joshua doesn't tell us here specifically how they stood, I'm assuming that they followed this, right? I mean, that's what Moses commanded them to do, so I'm going to assume that's the way they did it. In fact, you can see that on your handout, the inset on the map there, that actually lists those groups. I was a little bit curious why these and not others, why a group per group. They're not laid out by birth mother. You know, these 12 sons came from 4 different mothers. They're not ordered by birth mother. Now, Joseph and Benjamin are together, sons of Rachel. Dan and Naphtali are together, sons of Bilhah. Gad and Asher, the 2 sons of Zilpah, are together. The sons of Leah are spread out. They're also not in birth order. Reuben was the oldest. I also then, just out of curiosity, now they had not been assigned their territories yet at this time. But if you put them on a map, this is what it looks like. Those that received the blessing, I've got in green, and those that received the curse are in red. Is that interesting? Maybe. The heartland receives the blessing, the edges, the curse. If there's more to it than that, I don't know what it's supposed to be. Gave it the old college try. And here we go. Oh yeah, it's interesting to me too that Joseph was considered a group instead of Ephraim and Manasseh, who were his 2 sons, who were actually 2 tribes that both inherited their own land. But Joseph is listed here. And I don't have Levi on this because he just had scattered cities. Cities of refuge and a few others. Okay. 34. Then afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that's written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers who were living among them. At first blush, that almost sounds like he read the Pentateuch. But then I look at it again and note a couple things. He read all, in verse 34, he read all the words of the law, comma, so we're going to get a little more specific perhaps, the blessing and the curse. All of the Pentateuch is not the blessing and the curse. And, he says in verse 35, there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which he did not read. That begs the question, what did Moses command? Well, if you go back to Deuteronomy 37, he gives a specific list of blessings and curses for them to read. You can look at that on your own time. Deuteronomy 27 and 28. He lists curses to pronounce. He lists blessings to pronounce. And so I'm convinced that that's what Joshua read at this point. If you've ever read through the entire book of Genesis in a sitting, that's a lot of reading. Not to mention Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus. What did I miss there? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Is that what I said? Okay. Confused myself yet. And if you go look at Deuteronomy 27, it was supposed to be read the curse, and then the people say, Amen. So be it. We agree. That's true. If we disobey, if we don't follow the Lord, may these curses be upon us. Okay, I just want to move down. Oh yeah, I did have a picture of that amphitheater-ish, but you kind of saw that already. I don't know why those 6 were on the curse side, as opposed to not the other tribes. Somebody had to do it. Well, no, they weren't being cursed, but they were responding to the curses that were being read, and then the other side responding to the blessings that were being read. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm trying to get down to my, there's Shechem. We'll come back to that at some point. There's some other stuff that happens there. I'm trying to get down to my blessings and cursings were typical part of the covenant. Okay, here we go. What's the point of this episode? So I've got 4 things here. The Israelites were to teach the law to their children. We read about that in Deuteronomy 6, and the application of this had probably been uneven, knowing people. And so this would be an opportunity to rehearse this, and perhaps there were kids that had not heard this, that were not aware, that had not been taught by their parents that this is the covenant that we're living under. The text doesn't say that. That's a little bit speculation on my part. I think it could be a useful reason, though. A second one, there seems to be some benefit to us in having public corporate events of this kind. Gary and I were talking about this a little bit. Why is it that we do baptism in a public way? Why is it that we do marriage, more often than not, in a public setting? There's something about that confirms it within us, isn't there? I have made a public proclamation of my faith or of a marriage covenant to another person. And I think there's an element of that here too. With the whole nation doing this publicly, that drives it home in a way that you don't get just in a private reading or a private covenant thing. So perhaps that's part of it. The covenant had not previously been renewed by this generation. And perhaps, again, there may have been multiple generations that had not been through this covenant since the time that Moses brought it down from Mount Sinai. So they were due. It's time. And last but not least, this set the stage for the following conquest, because the success of that, as we've already seen, depended on them being obedient. And might I add, to be obedient, you have to know what the rules are. And so here we have them set out. And if you go read through Deuteronomy 27 and 28, there's some pretty specific stuff in there. These are the things you can do that will receive blessing. These are the things that you do that will bring a curse upon you. And now everybody knows. They should have known already, but for certain now, it's no secret. So I think those are some reasons, perhaps not all the reason, but some reasons why they did this. And from here, they will begin the conquest, although our next chapter is all about these crafty little people from Gibeon that come in and snooker the Israelites. Fascinating little section, but that's for another time. Any final burning questions? Good. Thanks for your patience. I realize there's a lot of stuff to cover, and I did it in kind of an odd way. Hopefully you can see what comes up here. Let me close this in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for the way that we can see here you've taken care of your people. We realize that you have expectations from us as well as children of a new covenant. Help us to be diligent in finding out what you expect of us through your word, and give us hearts that are soft toward you, willing to amend our ways and to do what you've asked us to do. We realize we're sinful and weak, and so we ask for your strength to change our lives in ways that please and honor you. In your name, amen.